This video is sponsored by Academy of Therapy Wisdom, online programs and training for therapists. A young artist finds herself working as a corporate lawyer, wondering how she ended up so far from her creative dreams. A retiree looks back on life and notices a pattern of decisions that led him to a fulfilling second career he never imagined. Are these outcomes chance, choice, or destiny? In truth, they may be a blend of all three. Each of us is on a journey toward what can be called our inevitable self, the person we are meant to become through the interplay of our choices, experiences, and inner nature. This video explores the concept of the inevitable self and how accepting who you are becoming can lead to growth and fulfillment. Drawing on insights from science and medicine, psychology, philosophy, and spirituality, we will delve into what shapes our identity over time. Through real-world examples, practical exercises, and engaging storytelling, we will uncover how to embrace the ongoing process of becoming your true self in a formal yet accessible way. At the heart of the inevitable self is a paradox. We are free to shape our lives, yet we are also influenced by factors that give our journey a certain direction. Existentialist philosophy, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre's famous claim that existence precedes essence, emphasizes that we are not born with a predefined essence. We create ourselves through our actions and choices. Sartre believed that we have radical freedom to define who we are. However, the inevitable self theory proposes that alongside this freedom, there are deterministic influences, like our genetics, upbringing, and unconscious tendencies, that nudge us toward a particular path. In other words, a blend of free will and predisposition converges to form our inevitable self. Consider the quote often attributed to Sartre: "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you." This captures the essence of the inevitable self. We each inherit certain circumstances, traits, and past experiences, the things that have been done to us, but we have the freedom to respond to them in our own way. Our choices interact with our circumstances to shape who we become. Each decision we make, even those that feel entirely open, subtly guides us toward a specific version of ourselves. Over time, these choices accumulate and intertwine with our innate dispositions, leading us down an unfolding path, not a rigid, unchangeable fate, but a trajectory influenced by both intention and inevitability. This idea rests on the interplay between our conscious decisions and our unconscious drives. Psychologist Carl Jung observed that much of our personal development happens through the individuation process, a journey toward wholeness and authenticity. Jung noted that individuation is not achieved by conscious effort alone. It is also propelled by unconscious forces that bring us toward authenticity. In other words, deep within us, there are unconscious desires, instincts, and archetypes pushing us in certain directions. If we ignore these inner nudges, we might feel as if something is missing, or that we are not truly ourselves. Jung famously stated that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Whether or not Jung phrased it exactly this way, the point stands: if we remain unaware of our hidden motivations and patterns, we might end up following them blindly and feel our life is fated. For example, someone who has an unconscious fear of abandonment might repeatedly and unintentionally sabotage relationships, thinking it's just bad luck or fate that relationships don't work out. Only by bringing this pattern to awareness can they begin to change it. Thus, our inevitable self emerges from integrating those unconscious forces into our conscious life. Real-world illustration. Consider a man named Mark who found himself drawn to partners who needed saving. Time and again, he entered relationships where he played the rescuer, and each time he ended up feeling resentful and hurt. It seemed inevitable that he would have this pattern. In therapy, Mark discovered an unconscious drive at play. As a child, he felt valued only when taking care of an ill parent. This unconscious pattern was steering his adult love life. Once Mark became aware of it, he began to make different choices, seeking a partner who was his equal and learning to fulfill his caregiving nature in healthy ways, like mentoring at a local youth center. By illuminating his unconscious, Mark took control of what felt like fate and moved closer to a healthier, more authentic self. Modern neuroscience provides compelling evidence that both our freedom to change and our tendency toward familiar patterns are real. On one hand, our brains are remarkably plastic, meaning they can change and form new connections throughout life. On the other hand, our brains are efficient and tend to rely on well-worn neural pathways for things we do repeatedly. This creates a kind of inertia in who we are. We gravitate toward what's familiar, even as we retain the ability to change course. Over 130 years ago, psychologist William James suggested that by age 30, a person's character becomes set like plaster. He observed that many adult habits and personality traits seem fixed by early adulthood. Indeed, some aspects of our personality and behavior do stabilize as we get older. We develop routines, preferences, and responses that feel natural. This stability is partly due to what neuroscientists call Hebbian learning, often summarized as neurons that fire together wire together. When we repeatedly think or do something, the neural circuit for that behavior strengthens, making it easier to do it again in the future. For example, if someone habitually responds to stress with anger, the neural networks for anger become more readily activated, and anger becomes a more automatic response. However, James's plaster metaphor is only half the story. While our patterns do solidify with time, they are not made of concrete. Neuroscience now shows that the brain can change even in later adulthood. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself, means that with intentional effort, even deeply ingrained habits can be altered. For instance, in stroke patients who lose the ability to speak, other parts of the brain can sometimes take over language functions, with therapy and practice, demonstrating the brain's potential to adapt. Similarly, when someone learns a new skill or adopts a new mindset, their brain circuitry adjusts to support that change. Neuroscientist Norman Deutsch describes countless cases of people overcoming neurological limitations through practice, proving that the brain is continuously capable of forming new pathways and behaviors. The inevitable self theory thus finds a middle ground. We are neither completely bound by destiny nor completely free from our past. We are always in a dance between our established patterns and our capacity to grow beyond them. Each day offers choices. We can reinforce our existing self or nudge ourselves toward a new direction. Recognizing this interplay is empowering. It means that accepting who you are becoming is not a passive acceptance of whatever will be, but an active participation in your own development, guided by understanding of both your constraints and your possibilities. And now a word from our sponsor.
Are you looking for a place to build your skills and to learn different modalities in the psychology field? Do you want to be a more effective clinician by learning newer forms of the therapeutic approach? You should try Academy of Therapy Wisdom online programs and training for therapists. With live and on-demand courses, they have what you need to get you up to date in the psychology world, like the course Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors with Janina Fisher, starting in April. Use my link to get the course and learn all you need to help treat trauma in your patients. Academy of Therapy Wisdom online programs and training for therapists is the place to go for your psychology training needs. Again, that's Academy of Therapy Wisdom online programs and training for therapists. Try them out today.
Sponsor. Psychology delves deeper into how our identity forms and evolves. Developmental psychology shows that we go through stages in life, each with its own challenges and opportunities for defining who we are. In adolescence, for example, we face the task of forming an identity, as noted by psychologist Erik Erikson. Our early choices, what we study, who we befriend, how we see ourselves, set the stage for our adult self. Yet, even after adolescence, our identity continues to be refined by new roles, like career and parenthood and experiences. Personality psychology historically sided with William James in thinking core traits stabilize by early adulthood, but newer research suggests that personality can and does change in subtle ways across the lifespan. People tend, on average, to become more conscientious and emotionally stable from young adulthood into middle age, and traits can shift with significant life events or deliberate personal effort. For instance, someone very shy in youth might, through years of career experience and social effort, become more outgoing or confident by their 50s. Such changes might not radically alter that person's essence, but they do shape the version of the self that manifests. One key psychological insight is the concept of self-narrative, the story we tell about ourselves. Our brains are natural storytellers, weaving our memories into a coherent narrative of who I am. Importantly, this story is not fixed. It's a reconstructive process, meaning our memory reshapes itself over time. Psychologist Daniel Schachter notes that memory isn't a perfect recording of the past, but is influenced by our current beliefs and mood. If we carry a narrative like I always fail due to some past setbacks, that memory bias can color how we interpret new events, possibly creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. For example, a student who believes they're bad at math because of one poor exam might recall only math struggles and overlook successes, reinforcing an identity of a non-math person. However, by revisiting and reframing our memories, perhaps recalling that they actually improved when they studied consistently, we can change the narrative. Therapeutic techniques like journaling or cognitive behavioral therapy often help individuals reframe their life story, gleaning new, empowering meanings from past events. This, in turn, changes how people see themselves and their future possibilities. Case study: Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived a concentration camp, provides a powerful example of shaping oneself through meaning. In the darkest of circumstances, Frankl observed that those who found a deeper purpose or will to meaning were more resilient. Frankl himself chose to find meaning in his suffering by imagining himself teaching future students about the lessons learned. This purpose became part of his identity. He saw himself as someone who could endure and learn from hardship. After the war, Frankl's experiences crystallized into his approach of logotherapy, which centers on the belief that our primary drive is the search for meaning. His life story illustrates how even in extreme loss of freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude remains, shaping the inevitable self. Frankl wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." By choosing his response, he aligned with the person he eventually became, a beacon of hope and meaning for others. Social and environmental influences. Our personal growth does not happen in a vacuum. Psychology also notes the strong influence of our environment, family, culture, society, on who we become. We internalize messages from parents and peers about what kind of person we should be. Over time, these messages can become part of our inner voice. For example, a child repeatedly told they are irresponsible may unconsciously carry that label and make choices that reinforce it, almost as if living out an assigned role. However, as adults, we can challenge these imprints. The field of self-determination theory, developed by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, emphasizes the importance of owning one's choices and aligning them with intrinsic motivations, what we truly value, rather than what others expect. Research shows that people are happier and more resilient when they pursue goals they find meaningful, intrinsic goals, versus those driven by external validation. For instance, someone might become a doctor due to family pressure, an extrinsic goal, but feel unfulfilled. Another becomes a teacher out of a love for helping children learn, an intrinsic value, and finds great satisfaction despite challenges. This distinction is key in the journey toward the inevitable self. When we make choices aligned with our authentic values, we feel a sense of rightness or flow, as if we are becoming more who we are meant to be. On the other hand, living out of sync with our values can lead to a feeling of emptiness or conflict, as if we are wearing someone else's life. Positive psychology research by Kenan Sheldon and Sonia Lubomirsky supports this. People who set goals based on intrinsic values, like personal growth, community, creativity, report greater well-being and persistence in the face of setbacks than those who chase extrinsic goals like fame or money. In short, knowing and honoring your core values acts like a compass toward your inevitable self. Illustration. Think of a high achiever in a prestigious but stressful job who feels unfulfilled. Suppose her true passion has always been environmental conservation, a value she sidelined for years. Eventually, her dissatisfaction pushes her to realign her life. She joins an NGO part-time, then eventually transitions to that field full-time, accepting a pay cut, but gaining immense satisfaction. Her friends remark that she seems more herself in this new role. In hindsight, every volunteer project or nature trip she took in her free time was a clue to her inevitable self, a dedicated environmental advocate. It took courage, but by listening to those inner values, she stepped onto the path that was subtly calling her all along. From a scientific perspective, the idea of an inevitable self intersects with questions of nature versus nurture, brain development, and even health. Genetics provide us with certain predispositions. For example, one person might be naturally more calm, another more anxious or impulsive based on inherited neurochemistry. These biological tendencies can make some paths feel more inevitable. A child with a very reactive, energetic temperament might inevitably gravitate towards careers or hobbies that suit an active, stimulation-seeking nature, like entrepreneurship or athletics, unless environment guides them otherwise. However, genes are not destiny. The field of epigenetics has shown that how genes express can be influenced by environment and behavior. For instance, a person might have a genetic tendency toward depression, but a supportive upbringing and good coping skills can prevent that outcome. Conversely, chronic stress can trigger genetic vulnerabilities that might have otherwise remained dormant. Neuroscience research sheds light on how our brains encode our experiences, making certain behaviors more likely. Earlier, we discussed Hebbian learning, the brain's habit-building mechanism, where frequently used neural pathways become stronger. On the flip side, unused connections can weaken, sometimes called pruning. This means if you deliberately stop a certain behavior or thought pattern and replace it with a new one, over time the old pathway can fade while the new one grows. Eric Kandel, a Nobel-winning neuroscientist, found that when neurons form new connections, for example, when we learn a new skill or memory, the structure of the brain actually changes. New proteins are synthesized, and synapses, which are junctions between neurons, strengthen. These biological changes underlie how we literally become different through experience. Kandel also noted that while change is possible, our brain often defaults to familiar pathways as an energy-saving shortcut. This is why, under stress, people tend to revert to old habits. The brain is taking the known route. Understanding this can foster self-compassion. If you've ever tried to change a habit, you know it's not easy. There is a biological reason. You are going against the grain of your established neural wiring, but with repetition, the new habit forms its own groove in the brain, and change becomes your new normal. Brain development and aging. From a medical standpoint, different life stages present different opportunities and challenges for self-transformation. During childhood and adolescence, the brain is highly malleable. By early adulthood, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and self-control, fully matures, which is one reason people often become more stable and planful in their 20s. Midlife can bring hormonal and brain chemistry changes that affect mood and perspective. For example, menopause in women and shifts in neurochemicals in both sexes can sometimes prompt a midlife crisis, or, more positively, a midlife reinvention. In older age, some cognitive flexibility can decline, but wisdom and life experience often increase, allowing people to focus on what truly matters to them. Another form of aligning with one's inevitable, essential self. Medical science also shows that our health influences our mind and vice versa. Chronic stress, for example, can alter brain structures like the hippocampus, involved in memory, and the amygdala, involved in fear, potentially making a person more anxious or emotionally reactive over time. If someone lives in a constant state of high stress, say due to trauma or a high-pressure environment, their inevitable self might develop around hypervigilance and anxiety because their brain has been tuned to detect threat everywhere. This is seen in post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, where survivors of trauma often have heightened startle responses and anxiety. Yet, promising research shows that practices like mindfulness meditation and therapies like CBT can physically reshape the brain toward calm and balance. A study in JAMA Internal Medicine found that mindfulness programs can help reduce anxiety and improve coping in people with stress-related conditions. Neuroscientists Yi, Yuan, Tang, and colleagues have documented how meditation can alter brain connectivity, enhancing areas associated with attention and emotional regulation. In effect, deliberate mental training can counteract some of the inevitable effects of trauma, allowing individuals to reclaim their narrative and continue growing. Consider the case of a combat veteran named Jake, who returns home with PTSD. At first, it feels inevitable that he will always be hyper-alert, easily angered, and withdrawn. This is how trauma has rewired his brain to survive danger. But through a veteran rehabilitation program, Jake starts practicing meditation and yoga. Over months, he notices he sleeps better and doesn't react as violently to loud noises. Brain scans from his doctors even show reduced activity in his amygdala, the fear center, and increased activity in his prefrontal cortex, the reasoning center, compared to when he started. Jake also begins to reshape his identity. From seeing himself solely as a broken soldier, he starts to see himself as a survivor and mentor who can use his experience to help others. He volunteers with a youth group, telling his story and teaching coping skills. The trajectory of who Jake is becoming shifts dramatically, not erasing the past but integrating it into a new, purposeful self. His inevitable self, which once looked like a man defined by trauma, has now become a man defined by resilience and service. This example highlights that acceptance of who we are becoming doesn't mean we accept a negative outcome as destiny. Instead, it means acknowledging where we are now, even if scarred, understanding what shaped us, and then working with those materials to grow in a healthier direction. In Jake's case, accepting his current state, acknowledging PTSD, and seeking help was the first step to changing it. Denial or resistance, thinking I shouldn't have these issues, might have kept him stuck. Throughout history, philosophers and spiritual teachers have grappled with questions of fate, self, and purpose. The inevitable self can be seen through various philosophical lenses. Existentialism. Sartre and other existentialists argued that we are the authors of our lives. Sartre's declaration that man is nothing else but what he makes of himself captures this sentiment. From this view, there's no pre-written script. Our essence is the sum of our actions. And yet, existentialists also acknowledge facts of life we don't choose. Our facticity, where we're born, our past, etc. Authentic living, according to Sartre, involves owning both our freedom and our facticity. We see this when Sartre says we must do something with what's been done to us. In choosing our response, we make ourselves. Thus, an inevitable self from an existential perspective isn't a static fate. It's the result of continuously exercising freedom in the face of life's givens. The philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty also spoke to this balance, noting that our freedom is always situated in context. We always start from somewhere, our body, our history, and then transcend it through choice. Determinism and compatibilism. On the other side, some philosophical viewpoints, like strict determinism, suggest everything about us is caused by prior events, physics, biology, etc., leaving no room for free will. David Hume, an empiricist philosopher, saw personal identity as a collection of perceptions with no fixed core, which implies that change in those perceptions changes the self. Modern discussions often take a compatibilist stance. We can be shaped by deterministic forces and still act freely in a meaningful way. The inevitable self fits here. It's shaped by countless prior causes, yet it is realized through our own participation and choices. Teleology, purpose-driven life. Ancient philosophers like Aristotle believed that everything has an entelechy, or an inner aim. An acorn's entelechy is to become an oak tree, provided conditions allow. By analogy, one might ask, do humans have an inner aim or highest potential? Aristotle spoke of achieving eudaimonia, flourishing, through practicing virtues, effectively becoming the best version of oneself. While he didn't frame it as inevitable, he did suggest that by consistently living according to our virtues and reason, we fulfill our true nature. In a sense, living virtuously reveals the noble self that was possible all along. Eastern philosophies. In contrast to Western ideas of a fixed true self, Buddhism teaches Anatman, no fixed self. The self is seen as a process, a series of aggregates, feelings, perceptions, thoughts that are constantly changing. From this view, the inevitable self is not about becoming a predetermined someone, but realizing the fluid nature of our being. A Buddhist perspective would encourage accepting impermanence in ourselves, the fact that change is the only constant. Paradoxically, accepting that we have no fixed identity can be liberating. It allows us to change and grow without clinging to who we think we must be. As Buddhist teacher Andrew Olensky notes, what we call self is a mental construct that can be untangled to reveal a more compassionate, less ego-driven state. In practical terms, this might mean not identifying entirely with transient attributes. I am a failure or I am a success are both seen as temporary and not the whole of one's being. Instead, mindfulness and meditation help one observe the ebb and flow of experience, fostering an understanding that we are an ongoing work in progress, spirituality, and destiny. Many spiritual traditions hold that each person has a purpose or calling. In Hindu philosophy, this is related to dharma, one's righteous path or duty. A modern spiritual writer, Gary Zukov, speaks of aligning the personality with the soul in the seat of the soul, implying that when we tune into our soul's purpose, we become who we're truly meant to be. This has a flavor of the inevitable self, a belief that deep inside, there is a highest version of you seeking to emerge. Similarly, Christian theology might frame it as becoming who God created you to be, fulfilling your God-given potential or calling. Whether secular or religious, the idea is that life events guide us, sometimes mysteriously, toward a destiny. Some describe having a feeling of being guided. For example, repeatedly encountering opportunities in a certain field, or having persistent passions that, when followed, lead to a sense of destiny fulfilled. Spiritual perspectives often emphasize surrender and trust. Unlike the existential drive to assert freedom, spirituality might urge, listen inward, have faith in the process. For instance, the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, effortless action, suggests that by aligning with the Tao, the natural flow of the universe, we become our true selves without force. In practical terms, this could mean paying attention to synchronicities or intuition. Many people can recount moments where everything fell into place once they stopped forcing a particular direction and allowed a deeper guidance to lead. This isn't to say one should be passive. Rather, it's an active listening and co-creating with the forces of life. Example, a spiritual journey. Imagine a successful engineer, David, who constantly felt a void. He volunteers at a hospice and discovers a deep sense of peace while comforting people in their final days. This experience stirs something in him, a sense that he is meant to help others heal emotionally. Taking a leap of faith, he trains as a counselor and eventually becomes a hospice chaplain, integrating spirituality into care. Looking back, David notes that many events in his life, his own brush with mortality in a car accident, the loss of a friend to illness, his chance volunteering, all seemed to nudge him toward this role. He describes it as answering a calling. In his new path, he feels he is living his purpose. From a spiritual viewpoint, David's inevitable self, a compassionate healer, was emerging through those life events. By listening to his heart and trusting the pull toward meaning, he aligned with that destiny. In blending these perspectives, we see that accepting who you are becoming involves both agency and acceptance. Agency, in that you actively make choices to grow. Acceptance, in that you recognize larger currents, biological, unconscious, or spiritual, that carry you and you work with them rather than against them. The inevitable self is not about a fixed endpoint, but rather embracing the journey of continuous becoming. As the philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson put it, what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny matters compared to what lies within us. Our task is to look within, understand our inner drives and values, and trust that by following that inner compass, we will become who we are meant to be. Now that we've explored the concept from multiple angles, how can we practically apply this knowledge? Accepting your inevitable self is an ongoing practice. It's about making choices that align with your authentic self, and also about cultivating an attitude of openness to growth. Here are 7 practical steps, each with exercises, to help you embrace who you are becoming. Begin with self-awareness, illuminating the path of growth. The journey to your inevitable self begins with knowing yourself. Self-awareness is like a light that reveals your unconscious drives, habitual patterns, and core values. As Dr. Richard Davidson, a neuroscientist and mindfulness researcher, explains, awareness is a meta skill that enhances all other aspects of life by helping us observe our thoughts and feelings objectively. When you become aware of a self-sabotaging thought, I always mess things up, or a recurring emotional response, you gain the power to question and change it. Research shows that individuals who cultivate self-awareness have lower stress and greater life satisfaction, likely because they can course correct and make intentional choices instead of being driven by blind habit. Mindfulness. Meditation. Practice sitting quietly for 5 to 10 minutes a day, focusing on your breath. When thoughts or feelings arise, notice them without judgment and gently return to the breath. This exercise trains your mind to observe inner experiences without getting swept away. Over time, you'll start to notice, oh, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm having an angry thought in real-life situations, which creates a space for choosing your response. Studies have shown that such mindfulness practice can physically calm the brain's stress circuits and strengthen self-awareness networks. Daily reflection. In the evening, take a few minutes to reflect on your day. Ask yourself, what emotions did I experience? What triggered them? What choices did I make? And were they aligned with my values? Journaling these observations can be very powerful. For example, you might write, felt irritated when my idea was ignored in the meeting. Value, respect, validation. I responded by staying quiet, but I wish I had spoken up. Such reflections highlight areas for growth, perhaps assertiveness in this case, and also patterns. Maybe this irritation is recurring, pointing to an unmet need for recognition. By consistently doing this, you'll become much more aware of the connection between your experiences and your inner state. Affirmation for self-awareness. I am deeply aware of my inner thoughts and emotions, and I approach them with compassion and curiosity. This affirmation, if repeated regularly, reminds you that self-exploration is a kind and non-judgmental process. Awareness is not about blame, it's about understanding. Cultivate self-compassion, embracing yourself along the journey. As you become more aware of yourself, you will inevitably notice flaws, mistakes, or parts of you that are in pain. This is where self-compassion is crucial. Psychologist Kristen Neff defines self-compassion as treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding as we would a good friend, especially when we face difficulties. Instead of harsh self-criticism, we acknowledge our humanness. Research by Dr. Neff shows that self-compassion reduces anxiety and depression and helps build resilience and inner strength to bounce back. By softening our inner critic, we create a safe emotional space to grow. After all, it's easier to improve when you're not bullying yourself. Philosophically, accepting our imperfections is part of accepting who we are becoming. Existentialist thinkers like Sartre noted that we are always a work in progress, never a finished product. If we expect perfection, we'll be perpetually disappointed. Embracing the truth that I am imperfect and that's okay is liberating. It allows continuous improvement without self-loathing. Self-compassion. Break. The next time you experience a setback or notice you're berating yourself, I shouldn't have done that. Pause and take a self-compassion break. Acknowledge the difficulty. Remind yourself that everyone makes mistakes, and offer yourself some kind words. This practice helps to soothe your inner critic and fosters a more supportive inner dialogue. Thank you for today. Thank you for yesterday. Thank you for tomorrow. Always remember to question your reality. And at every end, there is a beginning. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. You guys take care.